The fluorescent lights of the Speedway gas station buzzed overhead as 17-year-old Erica Washington pulled her Honda Civic up to pump number 4. The digital clock on her dashboard read 9:47 p.m., and she was already running late for her closing shift at the local pharmacy where she worked weekends to help her grandmother with bills. The autumn air in Columbus, Ohio, carried the crisp promise of winter, and Erica pulled her jacket tighter as she stepped out of her car. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. She had no idea that in the next few minutes, her life would change forever. She couldn't have predicted that a simple stop for gas would transform her from a quiet honor student into a symbol of resilience that would inspire millions. And she certainly never imagined that her response to an unprovoked attack would expose a web of corruption that reached from small-town prejudice all the way to the mayor's office. What happens when a teenage girl who has spent her entire life trying to stay invisible is suddenly thrust into the spotlight? What happens when someone who has been taught to keep her head down and avoid confrontation finds herself face-to-face with the kind of hatred she thought only existed in history books? And what happens when the entire incident is captured on video and goes viral, revealing truths that some people desperately wanted to keep hidden? Erica Washington had always been the type of person who blended into the background. At Roosevelt High School, she was known as the quiet girl who sat in the front row, turned in her assignments early, and never caused trouble. Her teachers appreciated her dedication, though they sometimes wished she would speak up more in class discussions. Her classmates respected her intelligence but rarely invited her to parties or social gatherings. She had grown comfortable in her role as the observer, the one who watched life happen around her rather than actively participating in it. But comfortable didn't mean easy. Erica's life was a carefully orchestrated balance of responsibilities that would have overwhelmed most teenagers. Every morning, she woke up at 5:30 a.m. in the small two-bedroom apartment she shared with her grandmother, Dorothy Washington, in the Linden neighborhood of Columbus. The walls were thin, and she could hear Mrs. Her notebooks were filled with meticulous notes, color-coded and organized in a way that helped her process information efficiently. Lunch was usually spent in the library, where Erica would eat the sandwich she had packed that morning while working on homework or studying for upcoming tests. The librarian, Mrs. Chin, had grown fond of Erica over the years and often set aside new books she thought might interest her. It was Mrs. Chen who had first suggested that Erica consider applying for college scholarships, recognizing that her grades and test scores could open doors that her family's financial situation might otherwise keep closed. After school, Erica's responsibilities shifted to work. 3 days a week, she had a job at Henderson's Pharmacy, a small family-owned business about 15 minutes from her house. Mr. Henderson, the owner, was a kind man in his 60s who had hired Erica partly because he needed help and partly because he remembered Dorothy from when they were both young and struggling to make ends meet in the same neighborhood. At the pharmacy, Erica worked as a clerk, helping customers find over-the-counter medications, organizing inventory, and handling the cash register. She was reliable and quick to learn, qualities that Mr. Henderson valued highly. The job paid minimum wage, but every dollar was crucial for her family's budget. Erica had calculated that her monthly earnings covered approximately 1/3 of their grocery bills and helped with her school supplies and transportation costs. The work wasn't glamorous, but Erica found satisfaction in helping people. Many of the pharmacy's customers were elderly residents of the neighborhood who had been coming to Henderson's for years. They knew Erica by name and often asked about her studies or shared stories about their own grandchildren. Mrs. Foster, who came in every Tuesday for her blood pressure medication, always brought Erica a piece of homemade candy. Mr. Thompson, a veteran who needed specialized ointment for a service-related injury, had once told Erica that she reminded him of his daughter and that she should be proud of how hard she worked. These interactions had taught Erica the value of small kindnesses and the importance of treating everyone with respect, regardless of their circumstances. She had learned to read people's moods, to know when someone needed extra patience because they were worried about their health or frustrated with insurance complications. These skills had made her more observant and empathetic, qualities that would serve her well in ways she couldn't yet imagine. On the days when she didn't work at the pharmacy, Erica spent her after-school hours at the community center, where she volunteered as a tutor for younger students. The program was run by Ms. Jackson, a former teacher who had recognized the need for academic support in their neighborhood. Erica worked primarily with elementary school children, helping them with reading and basic math skills. The tutoring wasn't paid work, but it was deeply rewarding. Erica had discovered that she had a natural ability to explain complex concepts in simple terms, breaking down problems in ways that made sense to children who were struggling academically. 7-year-old Marcus, who had been failing his reading assessments, had improved dramatically under Erica's guidance. 10-year-old Destiny, who had been convinced she was bad at math, now eagerly solved multiplication problems with confidence. These small victories had given Erica a sense of purpose beyond her own academic achievements. She began to understand that education was not just about personal advancement, but about lifting up entire communities. This realization had influenced her college plans, leading her to consider majoring in education or social work, fields where she could continue making a difference in the lives of young people who faced challenges similar to her own. Evenings at home were spent finishing homework, preparing for the next day, and spending time with Dorothy. Her grandmother was a woman of few words but deep wisdom, someone who had lived through decades of social change and had strong opinions about perseverance and dignity. Dorothy had grown up in the South during the Civil Rights era, and though she rarely talked about those experiences in detail, her stories had shaped Erica's understanding of justice and the importance of standing up for what was right. "You can't let people treat you like you don't matter," Dorothy would say while they washed dishes together after dinner. "But you also can't go looking for trouble. You find that balance and you'll be just fine." It was advice that Erica had internalized, though she sometimes wondered what it meant to find that balance in a world that seemed determined to test it at every turn. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Dorothy's health had been declining slowly over the past year. She tired more easily and had developed a persistent cough that worried Erica, though her grandmother insisted it was nothing serious. Doctor visits were expensive, even with Medicare, and Dorothy was reluctant to spend money on what she considered minor ailments. This concern weighed on Erica's mind constantly, adding another layer of stress to her already demanding schedule. The financial pressure in their household was constant, but rarely discussed directly. Erica was acutely aware of every dollar spent and every bill that arrived in the mail. She had learned to shop strategically, clipping coupons and timing purchases to coincide with sales. She had also learned to be creative with meals, stretching ingredients to last as long as possible and finding nutritious options within their limited budget. Despite these challenges, Erica maintained her academic excellence through sheer determination and careful time management. She had earned a 4.2 GPA and scored in the 95th percentile on her SATs, achievements that had caught the attention of several college admissions counselors. Her guidance counselor, Mrs. Peters, had been encouraging her to apply to prestigious universities, but Erica was torn between pursuing her dreams and staying close to home to help care for Dorothy. The college application process had become a source of both excitement and anxiety for Erica. She had researched dozens of schools, studying their programs, financial aid offerings, and campus cultures. She had written and rewritten her personal essays, trying to capture her experiences and aspirations in a way that would resonate with admissions committees. But the application fees alone represented a significant expense for her family, forcing her to be selective about which schools to pursue. This particular evening, as Erica pulled into the gas station, she was thinking about her upcoming interview for a full scholarship to Ohio State University. The interview was scheduled for the following week, and she had been preparing for days, researching potential questions and practicing her responses. The scholarship would cover not only tuition but also room and board, which would make it possible for her to attend college without creating financial hardship for Dorothy. As she stepped out of her car and reached for the gas pump, Erica was mentally rehearsing her answer to the question, "Why do you want to pursue higher education?" She had practiced explaining how education had been her pathway to opportunity, how her experiences tutoring younger children had shown her the transformative power of learning, and how she hoped to return to her community as a teacher or social worker who could help other young people navigate the challenges she had faced. The gas station was busy for a Wednesday night, with several cars at the pumps and a steady stream of customers going in and out of the convenience store. Erica noticed a few people she recognized from the neighborhood, including Mrs. Rodriguez, who waved from Pump 6, and Kevin Matthews, a classmate who was filling up his older brother's car. The normalcy of the scene was comforting, a reminder that life continued in predictable patterns even when individual circumstances felt overwhelming. As Erica inserted her debit card and began the process of filling her tank, she allowed herself a moment of quiet optimism about the future. Despite all the challenges and uncertainties, she was on track to graduate as valedictorian. She had real prospects for college scholarships, and she had built a reputation in her community as someone who could be counted on. The path ahead was still unclear, but it was filled with possibility. She had no way of knowing that within minutes everything would change. She couldn't have predicted that her carefully constructed life of quiet determination and background achievement was about to be shattered by an act of unprovoked violence that would force her into the spotlight she had always avoided. And she certainly couldn't have imagined that her response to that violence would reveal depths of courage and strength she didn't know she possessed, ultimately transforming not just her own life, but the lives of countless others who would see her story and find inspiration in her refusal to remain silent. The gas pump clicked to indicate that her tank was full, and Erica began the routine process of replacing the nozzle and retrieving her receipt. Behind her, footsteps approached on the concrete, but she didn't look up. In her world, it was safer to mind your own business, to avoid unnecessary interactions that might lead to complications. It was a lesson she had learned early and practiced consistently, a strategy that had served her well throughout her 17 years. But tonight, minding her own business wouldn't be enough to protect her from what was about to happen. The woman who approached Erica at Pump 4 was everything that Erica was not. Where Erica moved with quiet efficiency, this woman commanded attention with every step. Her blonde hair was perfectly styled. Despite the late hour, her designer jacket looked like it cost more than Erica's monthly earnings, and her high heels clicked against the concrete with the confidence of someone who had never doubted her place in the world. Bethany Morrison was 43 years old and accustomed to getting her way. As the wife of Columbus City Councilman Richard Morrison, she had spent the last 15 years building a reputation as a woman who knew how to navigate social hierarchies and political networks. Her husband's position had opened doors, but Bethany had walked through them with the skill of someone who understood power and wasn't afraid to use it. Tonight, however, Bethany was not at her best. She had spent the evening at a fundraising dinner for her husband's upcoming re-election campaign, an event that had not gone according to plan. Several major donors had expressed concerns about Richard's recent voting record, particularly his support for a proposed community center in the Linden neighborhood. The donors felt that resources were being wasted on certain communities that wouldn't appreciate the investment, and their displeasure had been made clear throughout the evening. The dinner had ended with uncomfortable conversations and veiled threats about campaign funding. Bethany had smiled and nodded through it all, playing the supportive political wife, but internally she was seething. She had worked too hard to build their social standing to watch it crumble because her husband had developed a conscience about urban development. On top of the professional stress, Bethany was dealing with personal frustrations that had been building for months. Her 20-year-old son, Tyler, had been arrested 3 weeks earlier for drunk driving, his second offense. The family's attorney had managed to keep the incident out of the newspapers, but the legal fees were mounting, and the situation was creating tension between Bethany and her husband about their son's behavior and their approach to discipline. Bethany's evening had taken another downward turn when she realized her Mercedes was nearly out of gas. She had been driving aimlessly after the dinner, trying to clear her head and avoid going home to another argument with Richard about Tyler's situation. The last thing she wanted was to stop at a gas station in this part of town, but her fuel gauge was approaching empty, and she couldn't risk being stranded. As Bethany pulled into the Speedway station, she noticed the mix of customers and felt a familiar discomfort. This wasn't her usual environment. She typically filled up at the upscale station near her home in the suburbs, where the clientele was more predictable and the staff knew her by name. Here, she felt exposed and out of place, emotions that she didn't handle well under the best of circumstances. Bethany parked at Pump 3, directly adjacent to where Erica was finishing her transaction. As she stepped out of her car, she was immediately irritated by several factors. The bright fluorescent lighting that she felt was unflattering, the loud music coming from someone's car stereo, and the general atmosphere of a working-class neighborhood that reminded her of everything she had worked to leave behind. Erica was focused on her own task, carefully monitoring the gas pump and calculating in her head how much she could afford to spend. She had $47 in her checking account, and she needed to leave enough for lunch money for the rest of the week. These mental calculations were routine for her, part of the constant budgeting that governed every aspect of her life. As Erica reached for her wallet to pay for the gas, she accidentally dropped her library book. The worn paperback fell to the ground near Bethany's feet, and Erica quickly bent down to retrieve it. It was a simple accident, the kind of minor incident that happens dozens of times a day at gas stations across the country. But for Bethany, who was already on edge from the evening stresses, Erica's presence represented something that triggered deeper frustrations. Bethany saw a young black woman in clothes that clearly weren't expensive, driving an older car, and her mind immediately made assumptions about Erica's circumstances and character. These assumptions were fueled by the political conversations she had endured all evening. Conversations that had reinforced certain prejudices about urban communities and the people who lived in them. When Erica bent down to pick up her book, she inadvertently brushed against Bethany's leg. The contact was minimal and completely accidental, but Bethany reacted as if she had been deliberately assaulted. Her face flushed with anger, and she took a step back, her voice rising to a level that attracted attention from other customers. "Excuse me," Bethany said sharply. "Do you mind watching where you're going?" Erica looked up, surprised by the hostile tone. She had been taught by Dorothy to always be polite and apologetic in situations like this, to diffuse tension rather than escalate it. "I'm sorry," she said quietly, clutching her book to her chest. "It was an accident." But Bethany wasn't interested in apologies. The stress of the evening, combined with her underlying prejudices and her general discomfort with being in this environment, had created a perfect storm of misdirected anger. She saw Erica's apology not as genuine remorse, but as confirmation of what she already believed about these people and their lack of respect for others. "An accident?" Bethany repeated, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "You people always have excuses, don't you? Maybe if you paid attention to what you were doing instead of trying to grab attention, this wouldn't have happened." The accusation was so unfair and unexpected that Erica was momentarily speechless. She had been minding her own business, focused entirely on her own tasks, and had done nothing to seek attention or cause problems. The suggestion that she had somehow orchestrated the encounter was both bewildering and hurtful. Other customers had begun to notice the altercation. Kevin Matthews, Erica's classmate from Roosevelt High, was finishing his transaction at Pump 5 and had heard Bethany's raised voice. Mrs. Rodriguez, who had been inside paying for her gas, emerged from the convenience store just as Bethany began her verbal assault on Erica. Inside the store, Marcus Thompson was working his second job as a night clerk. Marcus was 25 years old, a community college student who had grown up in the same neighborhood as Erica and knew her by reputation as one of the hardest-working young people in the area. He had heard the commotion outside and was beginning to pay attention, though he hadn't yet decided whether to intervene. Erica tried again to de-escalate the situation. "Ma'am, I really am sorry. I didn't mean to bump into you. I was just picking up my book." Quote. Her calm response seemed to further enrage Bethany, who interpreted Erica's composure as disrespect. In Bethany's worldview, a young black woman should be more deferential, more obviously apologetic, more willing to accept blame and criticism without defending herself. Erica's dignity in the face of unfair accusations was seen as defiance rather than strength. "Don't you take that tone with me," Bethany snapped. "I know exactly what you're doing. You're looking for someone to blame for your problems, trying to make this about something it's not. Well, I'm not falling for it." The accusation was so far from reality that Erica felt a surge of confusion and frustration. She had taken no tone, made no accusations, and sought no confrontation. She had simply apologized for an accident and tried to continue with her evening. The fact that this woman was creating a dramatic scene out of nothing was beyond Erica's understanding. "I'm not trying to make this about anything," Erica said, her voice still quiet but with a slight edge that reflected her growing frustration. "I apologize for bumping into you. I don't know what else you want me to say." This response crossed a line for Bethany. The idea that a teenager, especially a black teenager from this neighborhood, would dare to suggest that her reaction was unreasonable was unacceptable. Her anger, which had been building throughout the evening and was now focused entirely on Erica, reached a boiling point. "What I want," Bethany said, stepping closer to Erica with obvious aggression, "is for you to learn some respect. Maybe if your parents had taught you better, you wouldn't be causing problems for decent people. The attack on her family was the moment when Erica's patience began to wear thin. Dorothy had raised her with love, sacrifice, and strong values. The suggestion that her upbringing was somehow lacking was not just wrong, but deeply insulting. Erica felt her cheeks flush with anger, but she still tried to maintain her composure. "My grandmother raised me just fine," Erica said, her voice steady but firmer than before, "and she taught me to apologize when I make a mistake, which I did. She also taught me to treat people with respect, even when they don't deserve it." The implication that Bethany didn't deserve respect was clear, and it pushed her completely over the edge. In her mind, she was being disrespected by exactly the kind of person she had been complaining about all evening with the campaign donors. The social and political frustrations that had been building up inside her suddenly had a target, and her response was swift and violent. Without warning, Bethany drew back her hand and slapped Erica hard across the face. The sound echoed across the gas station like a gunshot, instantly silencing all other conversations and drawing the attention of every person in the area. Erica staggered backward, her hand flying to her cheek where a red mark was already beginning to form. The slap was more than just a physical assault. It was a public humiliation designed to put Erica in her place and demonstrate Bethany's perceived superiority. It was an act rooted in centuries of racial power dynamics, a moment when someone with privilege used violence to enforce a social hierarchy that she believed should go unquestioned. For a split second, the entire gas station seemed frozen in time. Kevin Matthews stood with his gas cap in his hand, his mouth open in shock. Mrs. Rodriguez clutched her purse tighter, her eyes wide with disbelief. Marcus Thompson dropped the inventory clipboard he had been holding and took a step toward the door. But the person most affected by the slap was Erica herself. In that moment, 17 years of quiet acceptance, careful politeness, and strategic invisibility collided with a reality she had never experienced before. She had been physically assaulted by a stranger for no reason other than existing in a space where this woman felt she didn't belong. Dorothy's voice echoed in her mind. "You can't let people treat you like you don't matter." But her grandmother had also taught her to avoid trouble, to be careful, to think before acting. The two pieces of advice seemed to contradict each other at this moment, leaving Erica standing at a crossroads between the person she had always been and the person this situation was calling her to become. Bethany stood over her, breathing heavily, her face flushed with the satisfaction of someone who believed she had successfully asserted her dominance. She expected Erica to cry, to run away, to accept the humiliation and disappear into the night. In her experience, that was how these encounters ended, with her authority confirmed and the other party properly chastened. "Maybe that will teach you some manners," Bethany said, her voice still loud enough for everyone to hear. "Next time, think twice before you disrespect your betters." The word betters hung in the air like a challenge. It was a term that carried the weight of historical oppression, a reminder of systems and attitudes that many people thought belonged to the past. For Erica, who had spent her entire life working twice as hard as everyone else to prove her worth, the suggestion that this woman was inherently better simply because of her race and social status was the final insult. As Erica stood there with her hand on her burning cheek, she realized that this moment would define not just her evening, but potentially her entire future. She could accept the humiliation, apologize again, and retreat to the safety of her car. Or she could do something that went against every instinct she had developed over 17 years of careful navigation through a world that had never been entirely safe for someone like her. The choice she made in the next few seconds would change everything, not just for her but for everyone watching, everyone who would later see the video, and everyone who would be inspired by what happened when a young woman decided that enough was enough. Kevin Matthews had quietly pulled out his phone during the altercation, initially planning to call for help if things escalated further. But when Bethany struck Erica, his finger had automatically pressed the record button, capturing everything that happened next. He didn't know it yet, but his quick thinking would ensure that this moment was preserved for the world to see. Marcus Thompson had moved to the door of the convenience store, his hand on the handle, ready to intervene if necessary. Mrs. Rodriguez had taken out her own phone, though she was holding it uncertainly, unsure whether she should call the police or try to de-escalate the situation herself. All of them were waiting to see what Erica would do, how she would respond to this unprovoked attack. None of them expected what happened next. The silence that followed Bethany's slap lasted no more than 3 seconds. But in those moments, Erica Washington underwent a transformation that would reverberate far beyond the fluorescent-lit gas station in Columbus, Ohio. As she stood there with her cheek stinging and her dignity under assault, something deep within her shifted. The careful restraint that had governed her interactions for 17 years suddenly felt like a prison she no longer had to accept. When Erica looked up at Bethany Morrison, her eyes held something that hadn't been there moments before. It wasn't anger, exactly, though anger was certainly present. It was recognition, the sudden understanding that all her life she had been accommodating people who would never extend her the same courtesy, apologizing to those who had no intention of treating her with basic human decency. "You made a mistake," Erica said quietly, her voice carrying a new quality that made everyone within earshot pay attention. Bethany, still flushed with the adrenaline of having asserted what she believed was her rightful dominance, misinterpreted Erica's calm tone as submission. "That's right," she said smugly, "and if you had any sense, you'd—" She never finished the sentence. Erica's response was swift, decisive, and completely unexpected. Her hand came up in a perfect arc that connected with Bethany's cheek with a sharp crack that echoed across the gas station. The slap was firm and purposeful, delivered with the precision of someone who had made a calculated decision rather than reacted in blind fury. Bethany stumbled backward, her hand flying to her face, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. For the first time in her adult life, someone had physically challenged her authority, and she was completely unprepared for how to respond. The shock on her face was total and absolute. "Now we're even," Erica said, her voice still calm but with an edge of steel that made it clear she was prepared for whatever came next. Kevin Matthews, who had been recording since the initial confrontation, nearly dropped his phone in surprise. He had expected Erica to cry, to run, or to call for help. He had not expected her to stand her ground and deliver exactly the response that Bethany had given her. His finger remained steady on the record button, though his hands were shaking slightly from the adrenaline of witnessing something unprecedented. Marcus Thompson, the store clerk, had been moving toward the door when Erica struck back. He paused mid-step, torn between his training to intervene in altercations and his recognition that Erica had simply defended herself. In his years working at the gas station, he had seen plenty of confrontations, but none quite like this one. Mrs. Rodriguez stood frozen near her car, her phone clutched in her hand. She had raised 3 daughters of her own and recognized the moment when a young woman finds her backbone. Part of her wanted to cheer, while another part worried about the consequences Erica might face for refusing to be a victim. Bethany's shock quickly morphed into outrage. In her worldview, the social order had very clear rules, and Erica had just violated every single one of them. A teenage black girl from this neighborhood was supposed to accept punishment gracefully, not retaliate against a woman of Bethany's social standing. "How dare you!" Bethany shrieked, her carefully maintained composure completely shattered. "Do you have any idea who I am? Do you know who my husband is?" Erica tilted her head slightly, studying Bethany with the kind of analytical gaze that had served her well in academic competitions. "I don't care who your husband is," she said matter-of-factly. "He's not the one who slapped me." The simplicity of the statement was devastating. Bethany had spent so many years defining herself through her husband's position that she had no identity separate from it. Being dismissed so completely was more insulting than the physical retaliation had been. "You don't understand the kind of trouble you're in," Bethany continued, her voice rising to near hysteria. "I'm calling the police. I'm pressing charges." "You assaulted me!" Erica glanced around at the growing crowd of witnesses, several of whom now had their phones out and recording. The irony of Bethany's threat wasn't lost on her. "You slapped me first," she said calmly. "Everyone here saw it, and it looks like several people recorded it." Kevin stepped forward slightly, his phone still recording. "She's right," he said, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had witnessed the entire encounter. "You hit her first, lady. She was just defending herself." Bethany whirled around to face Kevin, her face contorting with rage. "Put that phone away," she demanded. "You have no right to record me." "Actually," Marcus said from the doorway of the convenience store, "this is a public place, and you were causing a disturbance. We have security cameras that caught the whole thing anyway." The mention of security cameras seemed to penetrate Bethany's rage-induced fog. For the first time since the confrontation began, she seemed to realize that her actions might have consequences. Her political instincts, honed through years of campaign events and public appearances, finally kicked in. But it was too late for damage control. The video Kevin was recording would soon be uploaded to social media, where it would begin a viral journey that would reshape the narrative around racial confrontations and self-defense. The security footage Marcus mentioned would provide additional angles that would leave no doubt about who had initiated the violence. Bethany tried a different approach, attempting to regain control of the situation through intimidation. "Do you know what I can do to you?" she asked Erica, her voice dropping to what she thought was a menacing whisper. "I can make your life very difficult. My husband sits on the city council. We know people." Erica had heard threats like this before, though never so explicitly. She had seen how power worked in her community, how certain families and individuals seemed immune to consequences while others faced punishment for minor infractions. But standing there in the gas station parking lot, she realized that she was tired of living in fear of people who used their privilege as a weapon. "Go ahead," Erica said simply. "Make my life difficult. But you'll have to explain to all those people you know why you slapped a teenager at a gas station for accidentally bumping into you." The challenge in her voice was unmistakable. Erica had done the math in her head and realized that Bethany actually had more to lose from this encounter than she did. A city councilman's wife caught on video assaulting a black teenager would create the kind of scandal that political careers didn't survive. Mrs. Rodriguez chose that moment to step forward. She was a small woman in her 50s, but she carried herself with the authority of someone who had raised children and managed a household on a tight budget. "Misha," she said to Erica, "are you hurt? Do you need me to call someone?" The kindness in her voice was a stark contrast to Bethany's hostility, and it reminded everyone present that this confrontation was fundamentally about how people choose to treat one another. Mrs. Rodriguez's offer of help highlighted Bethany's cruelty by comparison. "I'm okay," Erica replied, though her cheek was still red from the slap. "Thank you for asking." Bethany seemed to realize that the crowd was turning against her. More customers had gathered, drawn by the commotion, and their expressions ranged from confused to openly hostile. She was outnumbered in an environment where she had no natural allies, facing people who had no reason to defer to her social status. "This is ridiculous," Bethany declared, though her voice lacked its earlier confidence. "I'm not staying here to be harassed by these people." The phrase "these people" hung in the air like a challenge. Everyone present understood the racial undertones, and several witnesses visibly reacted to the coded language. Kevin's phone captured every word, preserving Bethany's prejudice for posterity. Erica stepped forward slightly, not aggressively, but with the confidence of someone who had found her voice. "Nobody's harassing you," she said clearly. "You started this confrontation. You escalated it to violence. And now you're angry because I didn't just take it quietly." Her words were measured and precise, delivered with the kind of clarity that comes from years of academic training and careful thought. She wasn't shouting or being dramatic. She was simply stating facts in a way that made Bethany's behavior look even more unreasonable. "You're going to regret this," Bethany said, backing toward her Mercedes with obvious intent to leave. "You have no idea what kind of connections I have in this city." "And you have no idea what kind of connections I'm about to make," Erica replied, gesturing slightly toward the phones that were still recording. "The whole world is going to see exactly what kind of person you are." It was a prophetic statement, though Erica couldn't have known just how accurate it would prove to be. Within hours, her confrontation with Bethany would be viewed by millions of people, sparking conversations about racial bias, self-defense, and the courage required to stand up to injustice. Bethany fumbled with her car keys, her hands shaking with a combination of rage and fear. She had never been in a situation where her authority was so completely undermined, where her attempts at intimidation had failed so spectacularly. The reality that her actions had been recorded by multiple people was beginning to sink in, and panic was starting to replace anger. "Delete those videos," she demanded, pointing at Kevin and the other witnesses who had their phones out. "You're violating my privacy." Marcus laughed from the doorway, though there was no humor in it. "Lady, you assaulted someone in public. Privacy isn't really your biggest concern right now." The laughter seemed to break something inside Bethany. All evening she had been dealing with challenges to her husband's political position, stress about her son's legal troubles, and frustration with her inability to control the various crises affecting her family. The confrontation with Erica had been an outlet for all that pent-up anger, but now it was backfiring in ways she never could have anticipated. "You'll all be sorry," she said, though the threat sounded hollow even to her own ears. "When my husband finds out about this, there will be consequences." Erica nodded thoughtfully. "I hope he does find out," she said. "I hope everyone finds out. I hope every person in Columbus sees exactly how his wife treats teenagers who accidentally bump into her." The statement was delivered with such calm certainty that it sent a chill down Bethany's spine. She realized that Erica wasn't afraid of her connections or her threats. If anything, Erica seemed to welcome the publicity that would come from this encounter. As Bethany climbed into her Mercedes, she made one final attempt to regain some semblance of dignity. "This isn't over," she called out through her partially open window. Erica walked closer to the car, close enough that Bethany could hear her clearly but not so close as to seem threatening. "You're right," she said quietly. "It's just beginning." The Mercedes roared to life and sped out of the gas station parking lot, leaving behind a crowd of witnesses who were still processing what they had just seen. For most of them, it was the first time they had watched someone successfully stand up to the kind of casual racism and entitlement that Bethany represented. Kevin was still recording, though the main confrontation was over. "Did you get all of that?" Mrs. Rodriguez asked him. "Every second," Kevin replied, his voice filled with something like awe, from the moment she slapped Erica to when she drove away threatening everyone. Marcus had come outside now, officially abandoning his post inside the store. "Erica," he said, "are you sure you're okay? That was intense." Erica touched her cheek, which was still tender but no longer burning. "I'm fine," she said, and for the first time in the entire confrontation she smiled. "Actually, I'm better than fine." The smile wasn't one of victory or revenge. It was the smile of someone who had discovered something important about herself. Someone who had found courage she didn't know she possessed. Standing up to Bethany had been frightening, but it had also been liberating in a way that Erica was still processing. As the crowd began to disperse, Kevin approached Erica with his phone. "Do you want me to send you this video?" he asked. "I think people need to see what really happened here." Erica considered the offer carefully. Sharing the video would mean inviting scrutiny and attention that she had always avoided, but it would also mean ensuring that the truth of what happened was preserved, that Bethany couldn't later claim to be the victim of the encounter. "Send it to me," she said finally, "and feel free to share it. People should know that sometimes you have to stand up for yourself, even when it's scary." As Kevin transferred the video to her phone, Erica realized that her life had just changed in ways she couldn't yet fully comprehend. In the space of 10 minutes, she had gone from being an invisible honor student to someone who had publicly challenged a powerful woman's prejudice and won. The consequences of that transformation were about to begin. The drive home from the gas station was unlike any other in Erica Washington's life. Her hands gripped the steering wheel with a steadiness that surprised her, considering the adrenaline still coursing through her veins. The familiar streets of the Linden neighborhood looked different somehow, as if the confrontation with Bethany Morrison had shifted not just her perspective, but the very landscape around her. Her phone, sitting in the passenger seat, buzzed constantly with notifications. Kevin had uploaded the video to his social media accounts within minutes of her leaving the gas station, and the responses were already pouring in. Each ping represented someone watching the moment when she had refused to be a victim, someone witnessing her transformation from quiet student to someone who wouldn't accept injustice silently. When Erica pulled into the narrow driveway beside her grandmother's apartment building, she sat in the car for a few moments, trying to process what had just happened. The fluorescent security light cast long shadows across the cracked concrete, and she could see the familiar silhouette of Dorothy waiting by the window. Her grandmother always waited up when Erica worked late, a habit that had provided comfort for years, but tonight felt like the calm before a storm. Dorothy Washington had seen many things in her 73 years, but she had never seen her granddaughter walk through the front door with the expression Erica wore that night. There was something different in the way Erica carried herself, a new kind of awareness that hadn't been there when she left for work that morning. "Baby, you're later than usual," Dorothy said as Erica entered the small living room. "Everything all right at the pharmacy?" Erica set down her keys and looked at her grandmother, trying to find the right words to explain what had transpired. How do you tell someone who raised you to avoid confrontation that you had just publicly challenged a powerful woman? How do you explain that the careful balance she had taught you to maintain had suddenly shifted? Grandma, Erica said slowly, something happened tonight. Something big. Dorothy's expression immediately became concerned. She had raised 5 children of her own before taking on Erica, and she knew the difference between typical teenage drama and genuine crisis. The tone in Erica's voice suggested the latter. "Sit down, baby," Dorothy said, patting the worn couch cushion beside her. "Tell me what's wrong." As Erica recounted the events at the gas station, she watched her grandmother's face cycle through surprise, anger, concern, and finally something that looked like pride. Dorothy had lived through the civil rights era, had witnessed the courage required to stand up to systemic oppression, and she recognized something familiar in her granddaughter's account. "She hit you first?" Dorothy asked when Erica finished the story. "Yes, ma'am, for no reason at all, except that I bumped into her by accident." Dorothy was quiet for a long moment, her weathered hands folded in her lap. When she finally spoke, her voice carried the weight of decades of experience navigating racial prejudice. "And you hit her back?" "Yes, ma'am. I know you always taught me to avoid trouble, but—" "Baby," Dorothy interrupted gently, "there's a difference between avoiding trouble and letting people walk all over you. Sounds like you found that line tonight." The validation from her grandmother was something Erica hadn't expected. She had prepared herself for lectures about the dangers of confronting powerful people, warnings about the consequences of making enemies. Instead, Dorothy's response suggested that she understood the impossible position Erica had been placed in. "But Grandma, this woman is married to a city councilman. She made all kinds of threats about having connections, about making my life difficult. What if she tries to cause problems for you at work, or for me at school?" Dorothy smiled, and for a moment Erica could see the young woman her grandmother had been, the one who had faced down segregation and Jim Crow laws with quiet determination. "Honey, people like that woman have been making threats against people like us for longer than you've been alive. The question is, are you going to let fear of their threats stop you from living with dignity?" Before Erica could answer, her phone rang. The caller ID showed a number she didn't recognize, but when she answered, the voice on the other end was familiar. It was Marcus Thompson from the gas station. "Erica, I hope it's okay that I got your number from Kevin. I wanted to check on you and also let you know that the police were just here asking about what happened tonight." Erica's stomach dropped. "The police? Did that woman actually call them?" "She did. But here's the thing. I showed them our security footage, and Kevin shared his video with them. The officer said it was clear that she assaulted you first and that you were acting in self-defense. They're not planning to pursue any charges against you." The relief was immediate and overwhelming. One of Erica's biggest fears had been that Bethany's connections might result in criminal charges that could jeopardize her college plans. Knowing that the evidence supported her version of events was reassuring, but it also raised new questions about what might happen next. "Did they say anything about pressing charges against her?" Erica asked. "That's up to you," Marcus replied. "The officer left me his card and said you could call if you want to file a complaint. But Erica, there's something else you should know. The video Kevin posted is spreading really fast. Like, really fast. I've already seen it shared by people I don't even know." After ending the call with Marcus, Erica opened her social media apps and was stunned by what she found. Kevin's video had been shared hundreds of times in just the past hour. The comments ranged from supportive to outraged to analytical. But they all seemed to recognize the significance of what had happened. One comment that stood out came from someone named @TeachermsJones. "This young woman just showed every kid in America that you don't have to accept being treated like you're less than human. This is what courage looks like." Another, from @JusticeMattersNow, read, "The entitlement of that woman is exactly why we need to keep having these conversations about racial bias. But seeing this teenager stand up for herself gives me hope." There were negative comments too, mostly from people who seemed to think Erica should have been more respectful or that she had somehow provoked the encounter. But they were vastly outnumbered by messages of support and admiration. Dorothy, who had been watching Erica scroll through her phone, finally spoke up. "Seems like your story is reaching a lot of people. I never wanted this kind of attention, Grandma. I just wanted her to stop treating me like I didn't matter." "Sometimes," Dorothy said thoughtfully, "what we want and what we need to do aren't the same thing. You stood up for yourself tonight, but you also stood up for every young person who's been in your position. That matters." As if to emphasize her grandmother's point, Erica's phone rang again. This time, it was a number with a Columbus area code, and the woman on the other end identified herself as Janet Williams, a reporter with the Columbus Dispatch. "Ms. Washington, I've seen the video of your encounter tonight, and I'm wondering if you'd be willing to speak with me about what happened. This story is gaining significant attention on social media, and I think it's important that people hear your side directly." Erica looked at Dorothy, who nodded encouragingly. I'm not sure I'm ready to talk to reporters," Erica said honestly. "I understand this is overwhelming," Janet replied, "but I want you to know that I'm committed to telling your story accurately and fairly. I've been covering issues of racial bias and social justice for 15 years, and I recognize the courage it took to stand up for yourself tonight." After some hesitation, Erica agreed to meet with Janet the following afternoon. As soon as she hung up, her phone rang yet again. This time, it was Mrs. Peters, her guidance counselor from Roosevelt High School. "Erica, I hope I'm not calling too late. I just saw a video that appears to show you in some kind of altercation, and I wanted to make sure you're okay." The concern in Mrs. Peters' voice was genuine, but Erica could also hear the underlying worry about how this incident might affect her academic standing or college prospects. It was a reminder that actions have consequences beyond the immediate moment, and that her response to Bethany's assault would ripple through every aspect of her life. "I'm fine, Mrs. Peters. A woman slapped me at a gas station for accidentally bumping into her, and I defended myself. The police have already confirmed that I acted in self-defense." "I'm glad you're safe," Mrs. Peters said. "And between you and me, I'm proud of you for standing up for yourself. But Erica, you need to be prepared for the fact that this video is going to bring a lot of attention to you. Some of it will be positive, but some of it might not be. Do you have support at home?" After assuring Mrs. Peters that Dorothy was supportive and that she felt prepared to handle whatever came next, Erica finally had a moment to sit quietly with her grandmother and process the magnitude of what was happening. "Grandma, what if this ruins everything? What if colleges see this video and decide I'm a troublemaker? What if it affects your job or causes problems for our family?" Dorothy took Erica's hands in her own, her touch warm and reassuring. "Baby, let me tell you something I learned a long time ago. When you do the right thing, there are always people who will try to punish you for it. But there are also people who will respect you for it. The question is, which group of people do you want determining your future?" The wisdom in her grandmother's words was clear, but Erica was still grappling with the practical implications of her newfound notoriety. She had spent her entire life being careful, strategic, and invisible. Now, in the space of a single evening, she had become the face of a viral moment that was sparking conversations about race, power, and self-defense across social media. Her phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. "Saw your video. You're braver than most adults I know. Don't let anyone make you feel bad for standing up for yourself. A teacher in Cincinnati." Then another, "My daughter is 16 and black, and I showed her your video tonight. She said it made her feel less alone. Thank you." A mom in Detroit. And another, "I'm a 67-year-old white woman, and that video made me ashamed of people who look like me and proud of young people like you. Keep being strong. Susan in Portland." The messages kept coming, each one representing someone who had been moved by her story, someone who saw significance in her refusal to accept mistreatment. Erica began to understand that her decision to slap back hadn't just been about defending herself in that moment. It had become a symbol of resistance for people who had experienced similar injustices but hadn't felt empowered to respond. As the night wore on, the notifications on her phone showed that the video was being shared by larger and larger accounts. News organizations were picking up the story. Activists were using it to illustrate broader points about racial bias, and young people across the country were expressing admiration for her courage. But perhaps the most significant development came in a phone call just before midnight. The caller ID showed a number with a 202 area code, Washington, D.C. "Is this Erica Washington?" the voice asked when she answered. "Yes, this is Erica." "Ms. Washington, my name is David Chen, and I work for Congresswoman Patricia Martinez's office. The Congresswoman saw your video tonight and was deeply moved by your courage in standing up to racial harassment. She'd like to invite you to speak at an upcoming hearing on bias-motivated incidents in public spaces." Erica nearly dropped the phone. The idea that her confrontation with Bethany Morrison had reached the attention of members of Congress was beyond anything she could have imagined when she left for work that morning. I'm not sure I understand, she said. You want me to speak to Congress? The Congresswoman believes that your experience illustrates important issues about how bias manifests in everyday situations and how young people can be empowered to respond to it. She thinks your voice could make a real difference in the national conversation about these issues. As Erica hung up the phone, she realized that her life had been fundamentally altered in ways she was still beginning to comprehend. The decision to defend herself against Bethany's assault had set in motion a chain of events that was rapidly expanding beyond her control. Dorothy, who had been listening to the conversation, smiled at her granddaughter with obvious pride. Looks like that woman at the gas station picked the wrong teenager to mess with. Erica laughed, though it was tinged with nervousness about the unknown challenges ahead. Grandma, I think I'm in over my head. Quote, Baby, Dorothy replied. Sometimes being in over your head is exactly where you need to be. That's when you find out what you're really made of. As Erica finally prepared for bed, she knew that tomorrow would bring media interviews, more phone calls, and decisions about how to handle the attention her story was generating. But tonight, she felt something she had never experienced before. The knowledge that she had stood up for herself and, in doing so, had inspired others to believe they could do the same. The quiet honor student who had driven to the gas station that evening was gone, replaced by someone who understood that sometimes the most important lessons happen outside the classroom, and that courage often emerges in the moments when you least expect to need it. By 7 o'clock the next morning, Erica Washington's phone had received over 300 notifications. She woke to the sound of unfamiliar voices outside her grandmother's apartment building, reporters who had somehow discovered her address and were waiting to speak with her. The quiet life she had carefully constructed was disappearing with each passing hour, replaced by something she had never asked for but could no longer avoid. Dorothy was already awake, standing by the kitchen window with a cup of coffee, watching the small crowd that had gathered on the sidewalk. Baby, she called softly, you might want to come see this. Erica joined her grandmother at the window and was stunned by what she saw. 3 news vans were parked along the street, their satellite dishes extended toward the sky. A dozen reporters and camera operators milled around, some speaking into microphones while gesturing toward the apartment building. A few neighbors had come outside to see what the commotion was about, and she could see Mrs. Patterson from next door talking animatedly to a woman with a notebook. This is insane, Erica whispered. How did they find out where I live? Social media makes everything public these days, Dorothy replied matter-of-factly. But honey, this isn't necessarily a bad thing. Sometimes the world needs to pay attention to what happened to you. Before Erica could respond, her phone rang. The caller ID showed Roosevelt High School, and when she answered, she heard the familiar voice of Principal Davidson. Erica, I hope you're safe this morning. I wanted to call before you arrived at school to let you know that we've had reporters here since 6 a.m. asking about you. I've instructed our staff not to comment, and I wanted to discuss how we should handle your presence on campus today. The reality that her school was also being surrounded by media was overwhelming. Erica had hoped to maintain some semblance of normalcy, to attend her classes and continue with her routine while the attention died down. And now it was clear that normal was no longer an option. Mr. Davidson, I don't want to cause problems for the school. Maybe I should stay home today. Absolutely not, the principal replied firmly. You have every right to your education, and what happened to you last night doesn't change that. But I think we need to be strategic about how we handle this. Would you be willing to come in through the back entrance and meet with me and Mrs. Peters before the first period? An hour later, Erica found herself sitting in Principal Davidson's office with her guidance counselor, trying to develop a plan for managing the media attention while continuing her education. The contrast between this emergency meeting and her usual concerns about homework assignments and college applications was surreal. The district's communications director is on her way, Mrs. Peters explained. She's going to help us develop some guidelines for dealing with the press. But Erica, the most important thing is that you feel safe and supported here. I appreciate that, Erica said. But honestly, I'm worried about how this affects other students. What if reporters start bothering my classmates, asking them questions about me? Principal Davidson nodded approvingly. That's exactly the kind of mature thinking I'd expect from you. We've already sent a message to all staff about maintaining student privacy and not discussing any student with outside parties. But Erica, you need to understand that this story has grown beyond our school. beyond Columbus. You're going to need support systems that extend far beyond what we can provide here." As if to emphasize his point, Mrs. Peters handed Erica a stack of printed emails. "These came to the school's main account overnight," she explained. "They're all addressed to you." Erica flipped through the messages, her eyes widening as she saw the variety of sources. There were letters from students at other high schools across the country, notes from parents thanking her for setting an example for their children, and messages from civil rights organizations offering their support. One that stood out was from the NAACP Legal Defense Fund, explaining that they had reviewed the video and were prepared to provide legal assistance if Bethany Morrison or her husband attempted any form of retaliation. But perhaps the most significant message came from Dr. Angela Foster, the president of Spelman College in Atlanta. The email was brief but powerful. "Ms. Washington, your courage in standing up for yourself represents the kind of leadership we value at Spelman. I would like to personally invite you to visit our campus and discuss the possibility of a full scholarship, regardless of the outcome of your other college applications." Erica stared at the email, reading it 3 times before the words fully registered. Spelman College was one of the most prestigious historically black colleges in the country, and a full scholarship there would open doors she had only dreamed about. The irony that Bethany Morrison's assault might have inadvertently created the opportunity of a lifetime was not lost on her. "This is incredible," Mrs. Peters said, reading over Erica's shoulder. "Erica, do you understand what this means? Spelman doesn't just offer full scholarships to anyone. Dr. Foster must have been genuinely impressed by how you handled yourself." As they continued reviewing the messages, Principal Davidson's secretary knocked on the door. "I'm sorry to interrupt, but there's a woman here from the mayor's office. She says she needs to speak with Erica urgently." The woman who entered the office was young, probably in her early 30s, with the kind of polished appearance that suggested she was accustomed to handling crisis situations. She introduced herself as Sarah Mitchell, Deputy Director of Community Relations for the mayor's office. "Ms. Washington," Sarah began, "I want to start by saying that the mayor was appalled by what happened to you last night. No young person should have to endure that kind of treatment, especially not in our city." Erica studied Sarah's expression, trying to determine whether this was genuine concern or political damage control. "Thank you," she said cautiously, "but I'm wondering why the mayor's office is involved in this." Sarah shifted uncomfortably in her chair. "Well, as you may know, Mrs. Morrison is the wife of Councilman Richard Morrison, who sits on several important committees. The mayor wanted to ensure that you understand the city's position on this incident and that you know you have our full support." Quote. The careful phrasing suggested that there were political considerations at play that went beyond simple concern for Erica's well-being. She suspected that the mayor was trying to distance himself from any potential fallout related to Richard Morrison's position, while also managing the public relations aspect of the situation. "What exactly does the city's support look like?" Erica asked directly. "The mayor would like to present you with a Youth Courage Award at next week's city council meeting," Sarah replied. "It would recognize your bravery in standing up to discrimination and your role in promoting dialogue about important social issues." The offer was flattering, but Erica couldn't shake the feeling that she was being used as a political prop. The idea of appearing at a city council meeting where Bethany Morrison's husband was a member seemed particularly problematic. "I appreciate the offer," Erica said carefully, "but I'm not sure I'm comfortable with that level of public recognition right now. I'm still trying to process everything that's happened." Sarah seemed surprised by the rejection. "Of course, I understand this is overwhelming. Perhaps we could arrange something smaller, more private?" The mayor is genuinely committed to supporting young people who show leadership in challenging circumstances. Before Erica could respond, her phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. "This is Bethany Morrison. We need to talk. What happened last night was a misunderstanding, and I think we can resolve this privately, without all the media attention." Erica showed the message to Principal Davidson and Mrs. Peters, both of whom immediately looked concerned. Sarah Mitchell, reading the message over their shoulders, frowned deeply. "Ms. Washington, I would strongly advise against responding to that message or meeting with Mrs. Morrison without legal representation present," Sarah said. "The city's legal department would be happy to connect you with appropriate counsel if you'd like." The suggestion that she needed legal protection from a city councilman's wife was sobering. Erica was beginning to understand that her decision to defend herself had created ripple effects that extended far beyond the gas station where it all began. Her phone rang, interrupting her thoughts. The caller ID showed the Columbus Dispatch, and when she answered, she heard the voice of Janet Williams, the reporter she had agreed to meet with. "Erica, I'm sorry to bother you, but I wanted to let you know that Councilman Morrison just released a statement about last night's incident. I think you should be aware of what he's saying before we do our interview this afternoon." "What kind of statement?" Erica asked, though she suspected she wouldn't like the answer. "He's calling it an unfortunate misunderstanding between his wife and a local teenager. He says his wife was having a difficult evening and reacted poorly to what she perceived as rudeness, but that she deeply regrets the incident and hopes to make amends. He's also suggesting that the situation has been blown out of proportion by social media." This statement was exactly what Erica had expected, an attempt to minimize Bethany's actions while implying that Erica had somehow contributed to the confrontation. The phrase, "what she perceived as rudeness," was particularly galling, as it suggested that accidentally bumping into someone could justify a physical assault. "Did he mention the fact that his wife slapped me?" Erica asked. He characterized it as a, quote, "brief physical altercation that both parties participated in." He didn't acknowledge that his wife initiated the violence. The mischaracterization of events was infuriating, but it also clarified something important for Erica. The Morrison family was going to try to control the narrative, to reshape the story in a way that made Bethany seem like a victim of media sensationalism rather than a perpetrator of racial violence. "Janet," Erica said, "I definitely want to do that interview today. I think it's important that people hear exactly what happened, without any political spin." After ending the call, Erica realized that the stakes had just escalated significantly. What had begun as a personal confrontation was now becoming a public battle over truth and accountability. The Morrison family's attempt to minimize Bethany's actions suggested they were more concerned about political damage than genuine remorse. Sarah Mitchell, who had overheard the conversation, looked increasingly uncomfortable. "Ms. Washington, I want you to know that the mayor's office had no input into Councilman Morrison's statement. We maintain our support for you and our condemnation of what happened." The distinction between the mayor's position and the councilman's response highlighted the political complexity of the situation. Erica was beginning to understand that her story had become a litmus test for local politicians, forcing them to choose between supporting her or maintaining relationships with the Morrison family. During lunch period, which Erica spent in the guidance office to avoid the media attention in the cafeteria, she received a call that changed everything. The voice on the other end was warm, but authoritative, belonging to someone who clearly expected to be listened to. "Ms. Washington, this is Attorney General Patricia Williams calling from the state capitol. I've been following your story since last night, and I want you to know that my office is prepared to open a formal investigation into this incident." Erica nearly dropped her phone. The state's chief law enforcement officer was calling her personally about what had happened at the gas station. "Attorney General Williams, I'm not sure I understand. Is this really something that requires a state investigation?" "Ms. Washington, when a public official's family member commits what appears to be a bias-motivated assault against a minor, and when that official then attempts to minimize the incident publicly, it becomes a matter of state interest. We have reason to believe this may not be an isolated incident involving the Morrison family." The implication that Bethany Morrison had a history of similar behavior was shocking, but not entirely surprising. Erica had sensed during their confrontation that Bethany's actions came from a deep-seated sense of entitlement, rather than an isolated moment of poor judgment. "What would a state investigation involve?" Erica asked. "We would examine whether there's a pattern of bias-motivated behavior, whether Councilman Morrison has used his position to protect his wife from consequences, and whether there have been other incidents that were covered up or mischaracterized. Your courage in standing up for yourself may have opened the door to addressing problems that have existed for years." As Erica hung up the phone, she realized that her slap at the gas station had done more than defend her personal dignity. It had potentially exposed a system of corruption and abuse that extended far beyond one woman's prejudice. The ripple effects were continuing to spread, reaching levels of government and society that she never could have imagined. Mrs. Peters, who had been listening to the conversation, shook her head in amazement. "Erica, do you understand what's happening here? Your refusal to be a victim has uncovered something much bigger than any of us realized." But perhaps the most significant call came just as the school day was ending. Erica's phone rang with a number she didn't recognize, and when she answered, she heard a voice that sounded both familiar and impossible. Is this Erica Washington? Yes, this is Erica. Ms. Washington, this is Michelle Obama calling. I saw your video last night, and I wanted to personally tell you how proud I am of your courage and dignity in an impossible situation. Erica sat down hard in the nearest chair, certain she must be hallucinating. The idea that the former First Lady had not only seen her video but was calling to offer support was beyond anything she could have imagined. Mrs. Obama, I can't believe you're calling. This has all been so overwhelming. I'm sure it has been, Michelle Obama replied warmly. But I want you to know that what you did took incredible strength. You stood up for yourself with dignity and grace, and you've inspired millions of young people who have watched your video. That's not a small thing, Erica. As the conversation continued, Erica realized that her story had transcended the local news cycle and become part of a national conversation about race, power, and the courage required to demand respect. The ripple effects of her decision to slap back were continuing to spread, creating opportunities and challenges she never could have anticipated. When she finally hung up the phone, Erica sat in silence for several minutes, trying to process the magnitude of what was happening. In less than 24 hours, she had gone from being an invisible honor student to someone whose story was being discussed in the highest levels of government and society. The quiet life she had known was gone forever, replaced by something bigger, more complex, and infinitely more significant than anything she had ever imagined for herself. 3 days after the gas station incident, the Columbus City Council chambers had never seen anything like it. What was normally a sparsely attended monthly meeting had drawn hundreds of people, forcing city officials to move the proceedings to the larger auditorium at the Columbus Convention Center. The transformation was unprecedented. Rows of folding chairs stretched to accommodate residents who had never before shown interest in local politics, all drawn by the controversy surrounding Councilman Richard Morrison and his wife's assault on Erica Washington. Erica sat in the front row, flanked by Dorothy and a legal advisor from the NAACP Legal Defense Fund. She wore a simple blue dress that Dorothy had helped her pick out, something that looked professional but not overly formal. The weight of hundreds of eyes on her was both overwhelming and empowering. Every person in that room was there because she had refused to accept injustice silently. Richard Morrison sat at the council table, his usual confident demeanor replaced by visible tension. At 51, he had built his political career on careful relationship management and staying out of controversial situations. Now, his wife's actions had thrust him into the center of a racial bias scandal that threatened everything he had worked to build. His attempts to minimize the incident had only made things worse, drawing criticism from constituents who felt he was more concerned about protecting his family than addressing systemic problems. The meeting opened with routine business, but the tension in the room was palpable. Everyone knew the real purpose of the gathering wasn't budget discussions or zoning approvals, it was accountability. The agenda listed public comment period as the final item, but everyone understood that this was when the real confrontation would begin. Attorney General Patricia Williams had arrived that morning with a team of investigators and a briefcase full of evidence that would shock even the most cynical observers. Her investigation into the Morrison family had uncovered a pattern of behavior that went far beyond Bethany's assault on Erica. Over the past 5 years, there had been 6 separate incidents involving Bethany Morrison and people of color, all of which had been quietly handled through Richard's political connections. The first incident had occurred at an upscale restaurant in 2019, when Bethany had accused a black server of being, quote, deliberately slow and disrespectful. The server had been fired the next day, despite the manager privately acknowledging that the complaint was unfounded. Richard had made a single phone call to the restaurant owner, a major campaign contributor, and the matter had disappeared. In 2020, Bethany had called the police on a group of black teenagers who were studying in a public park near her neighborhood, claiming they were loitering suspiciously. When officers arrived and found the students working on homework, the incident was classified as a misunderstanding, and no report was filed. Security camera footage, which the Attorney General's office had obtained through subpoena, showed that the teenagers had been quietly minding their own business for over an hour before Bethany's call. The most troubling incident had occurred just 8 months earlier, when Bethany had physically confronted a black postal worker who was delivering mail in her neighborhood. She had accused him of casing houses and demanded to see his identification, despite his clearly marked Postal Service uniform and vehicle. When the postal worker filed a formal complaint, It had mysteriously disappeared from the system within a week. The Attorney General's investigation revealed that Richard had personally called the postmaster and requested that the complaint be, quote, handled internally. Each incident followed the same pattern. Bethany would act on racial bias, often escalating to confrontation or false accusations, and Richard would use his political influence to ensure there were no consequences. The system had protected them for years, allowing their behavior to continue unchecked until Erica Washington refused to be another silent victim. As the Attorney General prepared to present her findings to the City Council, Bethany Morrison sat in her lawyer's office across town, finally understanding that her actions had consequences she couldn't escape. Her attorney, David Walsh, was one of Columbus's most expensive defense lawyers, but even he seemed pessimistic about their options. "Bethany, the video evidence is overwhelming," he said bluntly. "You clearly initiated physical contact with a minor. The prosecution's case is straightforward, and your husband's attempts to minimize the incident have only made things worse." Bethany had spent the past 3 days in a state of disbelief, unable to accept that her world was crumbling because of what she still thought of as a minor altercation with a disrespectful teenager. The flood of media attention, the loss of her social standing, and the whispered conversations that stopped when she entered a room had been devastating to someone who had built her identity around social status and political connections. "This is all her fault," Bethany said bitterly. "If she had just apologized and moved on, none of this would have happened." Walsh looked at his client with barely concealed frustration. Even now, facing criminal charges and public disgrace, Bethany couldn't acknowledge that she had been wrong to assault a teenager. Her inability to accept responsibility was exactly what had made this situation spiral so far out of control. "Bethany, you need to understand that she started it isn't a legal defense when you're the adult who committed assault. Your best option at this point is to accept responsibility, express genuine remorse, and hope for a plea agreement that avoids jail time." Back at the City Council meeting, the routine business had concluded, and Mayor Jennifer Chen was preparing to address the elephant in the room. Chen had been mayor for 6 years and had built her reputation on transparency and accountability, values that put her in direct conflict with the Morrison family's approach to crisis management. "Before we begin the public comment period," Mayor Chen announced, "I want to address the incident that has brought so many of you here today. The assault on Erica Washington by Councilman Morrison's wife represents everything that our city stands against. We are a community that values dignity, respect, and equality for all residents, regardless of race or background." The applause was immediate and sustained, lasting nearly a minute. When it finally died down, Mayor Chen continued, "I have reviewed the video evidence and the Attorney General's investigation findings. The pattern of behavior revealed by this investigation is unacceptable and cannot be tolerated by anyone in public service." Richard Morrison shifted uncomfortably in his seat, knowing what was coming next. His political career was about to end, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. "Therefore," Mayor Chen continued, "I am calling for Councilman Morrison's immediate resignation. If he refuses to step down voluntarily, I will be requesting that the City Council vote to remove him from office." The crowd erupted in cheers and applause. Richard Morrison sat frozen, his face pale, as the reality of his situation finally sank in. His wife's assault on Erica Washington had exposed years of corruption and abuse of power that could no longer be hidden or minimized. When the noise finally subsided, Morrison stood slowly and approached the microphone. His statement was brief and carefully prepared by his own legal team, but it fell far short of the accountability the community demanded. "I regret the incident involving my wife and Ms. Washington," he said in a monotone voice. "While I believe the situation has been mischaracterized by some, I acknowledge that it has created division in our community. Therefore, I am announcing my resignation from the City Council, effective immediately." The statement contained no apology, no acknowledgement of wrongdoing, and no recognition of the pattern of behavior that had been exposed. It was exactly the kind of non-apology that had characterized his response from the beginning, and the crowd's reaction reflected their dissatisfaction with his continued refusal to take real responsibility. Attorney General Williams then took the microphone to present her investigation findings to the public. The evidence she shared painted a picture of systematic abuse of power that had been enabled by political connections and institutional indifference. Each incident she described was more troubling than the last, revealing how the Morrison family had operated with impunity for years. This investigation has revealed that Erica Washington was not the first victim of Mrs. Morrison's bias-motivated behavior, Williams announced. She was simply the first victim who refused to stay silent. The statement drew another round of applause, and Erica felt the weight of representing not just herself, but everyone who had been silenced by the system's willingness to protect people like the Morrisons. When the Attorney General finished her presentation, it was time for public comment. One by one, community members approached the microphone to share their thoughts on the incident and its broader implications. Many speakers praised Erica's courage and called for systemic changes to prevent similar incidents in the future. Mrs. Rodriguez, who had witnessed the original altercation, spoke passionately about the need for accountability. "I saw what happened that night," she said. "I saw a grown woman attack a teenager for no reason except prejudice. And I saw that teenager stand up for herself with more dignity than the adult who assaulted her." Marcus Thompson, the gas station clerk, testified about the security footage and his observations of the incident. "Erica Washington was minding her own business," he said clearly. "She was polite, respectful, and did nothing to provoke what happened to her. Mrs. Morrison created that confrontation out of her own bias and anger." Kevin Matthews, the classmate who had recorded the viral video, spoke about the importance of documenting injustice. "If I hadn't recorded what happened, Mrs. Morrison and her husband would have gotten away with this, just like they got away with all the other incidents the Attorney General found. Sometimes the only way to get justice is to make sure everyone can see the truth." When it was finally Erica's turn to speak, the auditorium fell completely silent. She had been preparing for this moment for days, working with her legal advisor to craft a statement that would be both powerful and appropriate. But as she stood at the microphone, looking out at hundreds of faces, she decided to speak from her heart instead of her prepared remarks. "3 days ago, I was just a high school student trying to get gas so I could go to work," she began, her voice clear and steady. "I wasn't looking for attention or trying to make a political statement. I was just trying to live my life with dignity." She paused, gathering her thoughts. "Mrs. Morrison slapped me because she thought I was someone who wouldn't fight back, someone who would accept mistreatment quietly. She was wrong about that, but she was right about one thing. This isn't really about what happened between her and me." The audience leaned forward, hanging on her words. "This is about a system that protects some people when they hurt others and punishes others for defending themselves. This is about how many times this has happened to people who didn't have cameras recording, who didn't have support, who were told to be quiet and move on." Erica's voice grew stronger as she continued. "I slapped back not just for myself, but for everyone who has ever been told they don't belong, everyone who has ever been treated as less than human, because of how they look. And I'm speaking today not just for myself, but for everyone who deserves to live with dignity and respect." The applause that followed was unlike anything the Columbus Convention Center had ever heard. It was sustained, emotional, and transformative. The sound of a community finally ready to confront uncomfortable truths about itself. But perhaps the most significant moment came after the official meeting ended. As people were filing out of the auditorium, a young black girl, probably around 12 years old, approached Erica with her mother. "Excuse me," the girl said shyly. "Are you the lady from the video?" Erica knelt down to the girl's eye level. "Yes, I am. What's your name?" "I'm Maya. My mom showed me your video, and she said it was okay to feel angry when people are mean to you because of your skin color. She said you showed everyone that we don't have to just take it." The mother nodded, tears in her eyes. "My daughter has been dealing with some issues at school. Kids making comments about her hair and her skin. I've been telling her to ignore it, to be the bigger person. But when I saw your video, I realized I was teaching her to accept disrespect instead of standing up for herself." Erica felt the full weight of what her moment of courage had accomplished. It hadn't just been about defending herself. It had been about changing the conversation for an entire generation of young people who deserved better than being told to quietly endure prejudice. As Erica left the convention center that evening, surrounded by supporters and followed by media, she understood that her life would never return to what it had been before the gas station incident. But she also understood that some changes are worth the disruption they cause, and some stands are worth taking regardless of the personal cost. The system had finally been forced to respond, not because it wanted to, but because she had made silence impossible. And in the days to come, that response would continue to reverberate through institutions, policies, and individual hearts across the country. 6 months had passed since that transformative night at the Speedway gas station, and Erica Washington stood on the campus of Spelman College, watching the Georgia sun set behind the historic buildings that would soon become her academic home. The full scholarship that had emerged from her moment of courage was just one of dozens of opportunities that had materialized in the wake of her refusal to be a victim. But as she prepared to begin her freshman year, Erica understood that the most important changes weren't the ones that had happened to her. They were the ones that had happened because of her. The Erica Washington Foundation had been established 3 months after the city council meeting, funded by donations from supporters across the country who had been inspired by her story. The foundation's mission was simple but powerful: to provide legal support, counseling services, and advocacy training for young people who experienced bias-motivated harassment or assault. In its first quarter of operation, the foundation had already assisted 47 cases across 12 states, helping young victims understand their rights and find their voices. Dorothy Washington had been initially skeptical of the foundation idea, worried that it would interfere with Erica's education and normal teenage development. But as she watched her granddaughter work with other young people who had faced similar challenges, she began to understand that this wasn't a distraction from Erica's growth. It was the fullest expression of it. "You know what I'm proudest of?" Dorothy asked one evening as they sat on the small porch outside their apartment, watching the neighborhood children play in the fading daylight. "It's not that you stood up for yourself. It's that you're helping other people stand up for themselves." The ripple effects of that night continued to spread in ways both large and small. Bethany Morrison had ultimately pleaded guilty to assault charges and received 2 years of probation, along with mandatory community service at organizations serving communities of color. Her lawyer had negotiated for the lightest possible sentence, but even that felt like justice to many who had watched her escape consequences for years. Richard Morrison's political career had ended with his resignation, but the investigation into his abuse of power had led to broader reforms in how cities handle bias incident complaints. The Morrison Protocol, as it came to be known, required that all allegations of racial bias involving public officials or their families be investigated by independent authorities rather than local departments that might have conflicts of interest. More significantly, the incident had sparked a national conversation about teaching young people to advocate for themselves while remaining safe. The hashtag #SlappedBack had become a rallying cry for a generation of teenagers who refused to accept that respect was something they had to earn through submission. Self-defense classes specifically designed for young people of color had started appearing in community centers across the country, teaching both physical techniques and de-escalation strategies. At Roosevelt High School, the changes were particularly visible. Principal Davidson had worked with the school board to implement new policies around recording and reporting bias incidents, ensuring that students had clear pathways to seek help when they experienced discrimination. The Erica Washington Scholarship had been established for students who demonstrated both academic excellence and community leadership, with Erica serving as the first recipient despite having already accepted her Spelman Scholarship. Mrs. Peters, the guidance counselor, had developed a new curriculum around dignity and self-advocacy that was being piloted in schools throughout Ohio. Erica showed us that teaching young people to turn the other cheek isn't always the right message, she explained to a conference of educators. Sometimes the most important lesson is that your dignity is worth defending. The academic community had also taken notice of Erica's story. She had been invited to speak at universities across the country, sharing her experience with college students who were studying social justice, conflict resolution, and civil rights history. Her speeches always emphasized the same key points. Courage often emerges in unexpected moments, individual actions can create systemic change, and young people have more power than they realize to shape the world around them. At Harvard Law School, Professor Michael Chen had developed a case study around the Morrison incident for his civil rights course. What makes this case so significant, he explained to his students, is that it demonstrates how individual acts of resistance can expose larger patterns of institutional failure. Erica Washington's response wasn't just self-defense. It was a form of truth-telling that forced a community to confront uncomfortable realities. The legal implications had extended far beyond Columbus. The Department of Justice had used the Morrison case as a template for investigating similar patterns of bias and cover-up in other cities. 12 separate investigations had been launched, based on tips from citizens who had been inspired by Erica's story to come forward with their own experiences of official indifference to racial bias. But perhaps the most meaningful changes were happening at the individual level, in conversations between parents and children, in classrooms where teachers were addressing bias more directly, and in communities where people were paying closer attention to how power operated and who it protected. Maya Rodriguez, the 12-year-old who had approached Erica after the city council meeting, had become something of a local activist herself. When kids at her school made racist comments, she no longer stayed silent. When a substitute teacher assumed she didn't speak English because of her last name, Maya politely but firmly corrected the assumption and reported the incident to the principal. Her mother credited Erica's example with giving Maya the confidence to advocate for herself. "Before I saw that video," Maya explained in an interview with the local newspaper, "I thought that when adults were mean to me, I just had to take it. But Erica showed me that even kids have the right to be treated with respect." The gas station where the original incident occurred had also been transformed. Marcus Thompson, the clerk who had witnessed the confrontation, had been promoted to manager and had worked with the corporate office to implement bias awareness training for all employees. A small plaque near the entrance read, "This business is committed to treating all customers with dignity and respect, regardless of race, ethnicity, or background." Kevin Matthews, the classmate who had recorded the viral video, had decided to major in journalism with a focus on social justice reporting. "Watching what happened to Erica taught me that sometimes the most important thing you can do is make sure people see the truth," he said. "I want to spend my career making sure important stories don't get buried or ignored." The national media attention had eventually faded, as it always does, but the institutions and policies that had been changed remained. More importantly, the conversations that had been started in families, schools, and communities continued long after the cameras had moved on to other stories. Erica herself had grown into a role as an accidental activist with remarkable grace. She had learned to balance her advocacy work with her academic goals, understanding that her education was the foundation that would allow her to create even greater change in the future. Her plans to major in political science and law were driven by her recognition that systemic problems required systemic solutions. "I don't want other kids to have to go through what I went through," she explained during her final high school interview with the Columbus Dispatch. "But if they do face something like that, I want them to know they have options. I want them to know that their dignity matters, and that there are people who will support them if they choose to stand up for themselves." The interview took place at the same gas station where everything had started, a choice that Erica had requested specifically. As she stood near Pump 4, where Bethany Morrison had slapped her 6 months earlier, she reflected on how much had changed since that night. "I come here sometimes," she admitted, "not because I enjoy reliving what happened, but because I want to remember that moment when I decided I wasn't going to be a victim. That decision changed everything, not just for me, but for a lot of people." As she prepared to leave Columbus for Atlanta and her freshman year at Spelman, Erica organized one final community event. The Stand Up Speak Out rally was held in the park where she had tutored younger students, bringing together everyone who had been part of her journey over the past 6 months. Dorothy spoke about the pride she felt watching her granddaughter grow from a quiet teenager into a confident young woman who wasn't afraid to challenge injustice. Mrs. Peters discussed the policy changes that had been implemented in schools because of Erica's advocacy. Attorney General Williams talked about the broader legal reforms that had emerged from the Morrison investigation. But the most powerful moment came when Erica herself took the microphone for what would be her final speech as a Columbus resident. 6 months ago, I was just trying to buy gas and get to work," she began, her voice carrying the same clarity and strength that had emerged that night at the gas station. "I never wanted to be a symbol or a spokesperson. I just wanted to be treated with basic respect." She paused, looking out at the crowd of familiar faces, teachers, classmates, neighbors, and supporters who had become like family over the past months. "But I learned something important that night and in all the months since. None of us gets to choose when we'll be tested. We don't get to pick the moment when we'll have to decide who we really are. Those moments choose us." The crowd was completely silent, hanging on every word. "The question isn't whether you'll face injustice in your life. You probably will. The question is, what will you do when that moment comes?" Will you accept it quietly, or will you stand up and say, no more? Quote, she gestured toward the younger people in the crowd, particularly the children who had been inspired by her story. I'm not telling you to go looking for fights. I'm not telling you to be reckless or unsafe. But I am telling you that your dignity matters, your voice matters. And sometimes, standing up for yourself is the most important thing you can do, not just for you, but for everyone who comes after you. As the rally concluded and people began to disperse, many stopped to thank Erica personally for the courage she had shown and the changes she had inspired. A group of high school girls presented her with a handmade banner that read, "Thank you for showing us how to be brave." An elderly man who had lived through the civil rights era told her that her generation was carrying forward the legacy of resistance that his generation had started. But perhaps the most meaningful interaction came from a young black boy, probably around 10 years old, who approached with his father. "My dad said you're the lady who didn't let that mean person be mean to you," the boy said seriously. Erica knelt down to his level, just as she had with Maya months earlier. "That's right. And do you know why that was important?" The boy thought for a moment. "Because if you let mean people be mean, they'll keep being mean to other people too." "Exactly," Erica said, smiling. "You're very smart." The father extended his hand to Erica. "Thank you," he said simply. "My son has been dealing with some bullying at school, and your story has helped us talk about when it's okay to stand up for yourself." As Erica shook the man's hand, she realized that this was what legacy really meant. It wasn't about fame or recognition or even policy changes, though those things mattered. It was about the ripple effects of courage. The way one person's refusal to accept injustice could inspire others to find their own strength. Later that evening, as Erica finished packing for college, she reflected on the journey that had brought her to this point. The quiet honor student who had driven to the gas station 6 months earlier would barely recognize the confident young woman she had become. But the transformation hadn't been about becoming someone different. It had been about discovering who she had always been beneath the careful restraint and strategic invisibility. Dorothy joined her in her bedroom, sitting on the edge of the bed as Erica folded her clothes. "You nervous about college?" Dorothy asked. "A little," Erica admitted, "but not about the academics. I'm excited about that part. I guess I'm nervous about leaving all this behind, about whether the work here will continue without me." Dorothy smiled, the same knowing expression she had worn the night Erica came home from the gas station. "Baby, you're not leaving the work behind. You're taking it with you. And all those people you've inspired, they're going to keep doing their part. That's how change really happens. Not because of one person, but because one person shows others what's possible." As Erica drifted off to sleep on her last night in Columbus, she thought about all the young people across the country who might be facing their own moments of decision, their own tests of courage. She hoped that her story would reach them in time, that they would understand they had options beyond silence and submission. The next morning, as Dorothy drove her to the airport for her flight to Atlanta, they passed the Speedway gas station one final time. Erica looked at Pump 4, where her life had changed forever, and felt not anger or sadness, but gratitude. That moment of conflict had revealed something important about herself and had created opportunities to help others that she never could have imagined. "Thank you, Grandma," Erica said as they pulled into the airport parking lot. "For what, baby?" "For teaching me that I belong wherever I am, and for showing me that dignity is something you carry inside yourself, not something other people can give you or take away." Dorothy hugged her granddaughter tightly, knowing that she was sending into the world a young woman who would continue to stand up for herself and others, who would use her voice to create change, and who would never again accept being treated as less than she was worth. As Erica's plane lifted off from Columbus, she looked down at the city that had shaped her, challenged her, and ultimately celebrated her courage. She was leaving behind a community that had been changed by her refusal to be silent, and she was carrying forward the responsibility to continue that work on a larger stage. The gas station incident had lasted only minutes, but its impact would continue for generations. And somewhere below, in schools and homes and community centers across Columbus, young people were learning that they had the power to stand up for themselves, that their voices mattered, and that sometimes the most important thing you can do is refuse to accept injustice quietly. The legacy of that moment would live on in every young person who chose courage over compliance, dignity over silence, and truth over the comfort of looking away. And in classrooms and courtrooms, in policy meetings and family conversations, Erica Washington's story would continue to remind people that change begins with a single person who decides that enough is enough. The ripple effects of courage never truly end. They just keep spreading, one brave heart at a time. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.